Welcome in, guys. It is Friday, and we finally kicked off the 2023 NFL season last night with the Lions at the Kansas City Chiefs. And man, what a game that was. I don't know if many people expected it, A, to be that low scoring, and B, for that outcome. But that is the beauty and the madness of the NFL. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. This is Britt's Fantasy Blitz. I am your host, Britt Flinn. And of course, we have a lot to talk about today. We have a full slate of football happening on Sunday. Throw those questions in the chat. We'll try to get to them. If we don't get to them over the course of the show, I will go through them and answer them on the YouTube chat later. Or you can at me on Twitter at Britt_Flinn, and I will be happy to answer them there. So today we've got obviously the Chiefs and Lions recap. We've got some underdog pick'ems for week one. And we will be joined for Friday Happy Hour by Sam Wagman from the Game Day NFL, Football Guys, and High Floor Football to discuss some matchups to exploit and to help answer your start-sit questions. So thank you again to our producer, Ernie Acosta, behind the glass for helping this move so smoothly and wonderfully. But let's get right to it. What an upset in Kansas City last night. I mean, we knew what an integral part of the offense that Travis Kelce was, but I don't think that his presence can be understated or downplayed any longer. Mike Tirico said that there would be an asterisk next to the Lions win because of the absence of Kelce and Chris Jones. And he's taken a lot of flack for that on social media. And I kind of agree with him. We don't talk about that later on in the season where people are on IR, where people are out, where, people play in the snow and teams aren't used to playing in the snow. We don't talk about all these other variables, but suddenly, because the Lions beat the Super Bowl champions, they don't get the credit that they deserve. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So, Tirico, let's just zip it. Have your editor remove that asterisk. So first, let's go over the Chiefs. There was a very boneheaded move by Andy Reid and the Chiefs to go for it on 4th and 25 with all of their timeouts left just before the 2-minute warning. CJ Gardner-Johnson took this decision personally, saying that the call showed no respect. And really, I think that he's right. The defense held Mahomes to 226 yards, 2 touchdowns, and forced an interception by rookie Brian Branch, no less. Boom. But there were also so many drops that happened during this game. That one call was not to be blamed for everything. The drops by all the wide receivers were absolutely horrible across the board. Kadarius Toney had 3, and by the third one, the crowd at Arrowhead was booing him mercilessly. It has to take a lot to get the Arrowhead crowd worked up that way, but he managed to do it. I also imagine the flack that he caught on Twitter because his Twitter or X profile no longer exists. It is deleted. But again, it wasn't just on him. Sky Moore, Rashee Rice, Justin Watson, and even Jerick McKinnon, who has typically been very dependable with his hands, were all dropping passes. It was just a very, very sloppy start and not something that we expected to see from the defending Super Bowl champions. I wonder how much of that is the loss of Eric Bieniemy and bringing Matt Nagy back in as offensive coordinator. But again, it could just be that Travis Kelce wasn't there and everybody was just a little rattled, and maybe they underestimated the Lions. I think their defense looked pretty good overall, even without Chris Jones. They only gave up 118 rushing yards. They sacked Goff once, and they only allowed 250 passing yards. So as much as Mike Tirico wants to say that Chris Jones was to blame for this loss, the defense held its own and looked pretty good. So you've got to give them credit where credit is due. So for Mom in the chat saying go Lions, let's talk about some takeaways and questions for them. First, the Lions defense looks legit. Aiden Hutchinson got pressure on nearly every play, and although he wasn't able to tally a sack, there were quite a few times that he got his hands on Mahomes. The secondary also looks greatly improved now that Brian Duker is the defensive backs coach, and they could really pose a problem. I don't think that we can talk about this enough, how improved this Lions defense is. Talking about another person who's the real deal, it's rookie tight end Sam Laporta. He had 5 targets, 5 catches for 39 yards, and that may not sound like a ton, but for a rookie tight end in his first game to finish second in catches is exactly what we like to see in real life and for fantasy football. What we don't like to see is how Jahmyr Gibbs was used. He had only 18 receiving yards on 2 catches and 7 carries. I named one of my teams this, but I feel that this is appropriate to reiterate in this situation. What Gibbs? He's supposed to be this positionless weapon, and he's been talked up since the draft, and they gave him 9 touches. David Montgomery only averaged 3.5 yards a carry, but they kept feeding him the ball. I mean, make this make sense to me. You had a very exploitable matchup without Chris Jones. You had a matchup in which allowed the most receptions by the running back position last season, and you don't use that weapon that you drafted in the top of the first round of the NFL draft. Maybe they were just trying to work him in and get him some game reps, but it doesn't make much sense to me. And I hope, especially for fantasy purposes, that this trend does not continue. Again, guys, thank you for joining us in the chat. Club Fantasy, Chris, my mama. If you guys have any start sit questions, go ahead, throw them in the chat. We'll be happy to answer them. But let's move on to some top news across the NFL. I think that we were all glued to our phones last night during the game when Joe Burrow's new contract extension was announced. He got a 5-year deal worth $275 million. But not only that, $219 million of that is guaranteed, making him the highest paid player in NFL history on a per game basis. I mean, that's absolutely huge. Now we've got other guys out there like Justin Jefferson trying to get deals. Jamar Chase is still trying to get a deal done. So with this massive deal that they gave to Burrow, we're going to be watching for Chase and see who they have to cut to make room to get him signed. The Cardinals may not be so set on taking after all, after ESPN's Dan Graziano reported that he expects them to play, quote, when he's ready. When that is, no one really exactly knows. And are they playing him because they actually want to win or because they want him to showcase his talent and potentially rid themselves of his bloated contract in a trade? No one really knows. And they're speaking in riddles like the Crypt Keeper. For those of you out there who don't know the Crypt Keeper, just look it up, I guess. It's too weird to explain. So let's go on and move to some injury news because there are a lot of injuries going on across the league. Cooper Kupp was officially ruled out for Sunday's game against the Seahawks. So if Van Jefferson is available on your waiver wire, you may want to look into that. I'm not telling you to go out and drop a stash player for him or to drop somebody who's going to have a bigger role throughout the season to get him. But if you have somebody, that you just drafted on a deep bench, I would look into getting Van Jefferson because it is possible that Cooper Kupp does a stint on IR. And in that case, Van Jefferson will be the wide receiver 1 for the foreseeable future. Another shocker in injury news today is that Ramondre Stevenson was not at practice today. There's no news as to why he's absent, but it could clear the way for Ezekiel Elliott to have a major role against the Eagles and show some haters. And yes, I'm looking at you, Kevin Tompkins, that he is not, in fact, washed. Now, the Patriots do say that they expect Stevenson to play, but in what capacity and how much remains to be seen. Club Fantasy FFL in the chat says Monty with 0 targets too. That was a big bummer. I agree. I would expect if Gibbs was absorbing the majority of the targets that Montgomery wouldn't get any, but for neither of them to get targets and the state of that wide receiver room in Detroit, it was really puzzling to not target the running backs whatsoever. The Baltimore Ravens also have some issues going into Sunday's game against the Texans, as both Mark Andrews and Odell Beckham Jr. were limited in Thursday's practice. Andrews, of course, is dealing with a groin injury, and Odell Beckham popped up yesterday with an ankle injury. Now, this doesn't seem like a big deal going in the matchup against the Texans, as they're probably just going to run the ball, but it is something to watch as Todd Monken does want to implement this air raid offense. And if he loses those pieces early on, it may be a little harder to get into the swing of things. Thank you, Club FFL in the chat. Stomach bug was the reported issue for Ramondre, should be fine for Sunday. So that is good to go. Hopefully we don't have a repeat of the Lamar Jackson cart rushing to the bathroom incident again, because that just lasted entirely too long. The Carolina Panthers may also have similar problems in their receiving core with 3 of their main wide receivers. Adam Thielen is absent from practice again today. Terrace Marshall was limited in practice, and DJ Chark has already been ruled out. This leaves rookie Jonathan Mingo, Lavisca Chenault, and then I'm probably going to butcher this name, so forgive me, but Amir Smith-Marset as the only healthy receivers. Yes, Hayden Hurst is in there, but yikes. This looks horrible for the rookie Bryce Young's very first start. In Cowboys news, shocker, they have problems on their offensive line. Both Smiths, Tyler and Tyron, suffered injuries in back-to-back days, and with no Ezekiel Elliott to help provide some pass protection, this could be an iffy start for Dallas. They don't have a lot of depth at running back either. I mean, Rico Dowdle is listed as the wide receiver too. As a Cowboys fan, I'm a little bit nervous if these guys are banged up because there's not a lot of depth on that offensive line. And with Dak getting pressured and the interception narrative that's surrounding him, he's going to need some protection to prevent that from happening again. For the Broncos, Jerry Jeudy has returned to practice in a limited fashion and does have a chance to play in Sunday's game against the Raiders. So good news for him, but with hamstrings, we know that they can be iffy, and we don't really know his timeline for return. Green Bay's also in trouble with their wide receivers, with Christian Watson absent at practice, Romeo Doubs limited, and again, there's not much depth behind them if either one of them are unable to go. Some quick hits. Kendre Miller held out of practice again. George Kittle remained limited on Thursday. Kenneth Walker popped up on the injury report Thursday, again with a groin injury. So it's not really good news unless you're a Zach Charbonnet manager. He might finally have a breakout game in week 1. So keep an eye on that. Finally, the Commanders are being very secretive about the status of Terry McLaurin going into Sunday's game, but he is thought to be available and to play. Now, it is an early game, so you should be fine in case he's ruled out at the last minute and you need to make a swap. So make sure that you tune in to John and Pimba and myself at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Fantasy Alarm and Better Sports Network YouTube page, followed by Howard Bender and Andrew Cooper at 10 a.m. Eastern on SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio. And then John and Pimba and Andrew Cooper bring it full circle at 11 a.m. on both YouTube pages as inactives get announced. We also, before we bring Sam in, hello, Albert. Hello, Mr. Scampers. Very happy to have you guys present and in the chat. I want to announce that the Bettercast app is now live. We are gamifying NFL Game Day on the Bettercast app. You can join our free-to-play contest during the NFL games this Sunday. You can predict what will happen, make picks, test your NFL knowledge. It's a completely interactive platform that's super, super fun. I had it open during the entire game last night. You can chat with our community about all the big plays, the top performers, busts, everything in real time. You can watch the NFL games with us this Sunday, play our free contest, and win tickets to win prizes. To join, download the free Bettercast app in the Apple app and Google Play Store. For all the injury news and season-long content, you also want to sign up for the Fantasy Alarm All-Pro subscription. You get access to everything on our site with this subscription, all of our lineup generator, seasonal content, our podcast, everything that you need for all sports. So to sign up for that today and get a free 7-day trial, go to fantasyalarm.com/allpro to sign up today. All right, let's bring in our guest today for Friday Happy Hour. Sam, welcome to the show.
Hey, Britt, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have you. We met at the expo. It was a super, super awesome time. I didn't get enough of a chance to pick your brain there. So I figured, why not have you on the show? And then we can just talk back and forth here. So very glad that you're joining us on this Friday. And normally we start out with just a little chit chat, little kind of icebreaker, since it is Friday and it is Friday Happy Hour. So I want to know what you thought of last night's game, your surprises, confirmations, just anything that stuck out to you.
I really thought it was kind of a miserable game to have for our kickoff game for the first game of the NFL season. It didn't really feel like we got any explosive plays on either side that we were kind of expecting. No real Patrick Mahomes magic, as we've kind of come to expect from him, making lemonade out of lemons and just bad situations. Everyone kind of looked a little bit half step slow there, in my opinion. So, it was obviously a little jarring to see, guys like Kadarius Toney kind of regress to levels that we haven't seen from them in years. With Kadarius, I think there was at one point Ben Solak put out a tweet last night. When the Chiefs targeted Kadarius Toney, he was earning -2 points per target. That means if you throw the ball to him 3 times, the Lions score a touchdown.
That's horrendous. That stat is horrendous, especially for a guy who has been primed for a breakout, was a first-round pick, and a guy who talked so much trash to Giants fans. I think that's probably partially one of the reasons he deleted his Twitter, because Giants fans were not happy with him after those statements, and they had some stuff to back it up last night. So that was particularly both interesting and disappointing. And Mo Diesel, we see you in the chat. We are going to get to your start sit, so hang tight. We will answer your questions shortly. I also want to know, Sam, do you have a Sunday ritual for game days? Is there a process, or is it just kind of a flow and what you feel?
I don't really. It's more of just a flow and how I'm feeling. I have as many fantasy leagues as a lot of other people in this industry do, which is sometimes scarily over a number of like 20. So I have to set lineups on Sunday mornings, just last minute checks and stuff like that. So that takes a little bit of a while, but otherwise I'm pretty low key on Sunday mornings. I like to wake up. These past couple of years for me, what I end up doing on Sunday mornings, especially in football season, is watch the F1 race in the morning. That's usually on around 9:00. Sometimes a little bit later, depending on where the race is in the world at that point. So I do love watching F1 on Sunday mornings, but these days I like to set my lineups and kind of just low key it before I head out to wherever I'm going to watch the game on that day.
It sounds so funny that an F1 race is like the low-key version of football, but it is true. As an analyst and somebody in this industry, like, you're constantly looking all over the place. You're checking your phone, you're checking your Twitter. How do you manage your leagues? Do you have like a spreadsheet? Do you have a whiteboard? How do you keep track of all of those 20 leagues?
Pretty poorly. Got them at pretty poorly. Haven't quite figured that one out yet. I do know a lot of people use spreadsheets. I feel like that's probably a good idea. I'm not particularly good at using Microsoft Excel. I just started learning how to use one to build a betting tracker for myself this year. So I'm like kind of like in my infancy using Excel to kind of build that. Maybe next year for the fantasy leagues, kind of baby steps, right? So,
absolutely.
But I don't know. It's very tough to manage. It's very tough to manage those leagues. One slips through the crack, and plus they're on all different platforms. Got a guillotine league here, got leagues on ESPN there, leagues on NFL there. It's an absolute nightmare for me to kind of go through, because it's inevitable that I'm gonna forget one. Like, I already forgot one last night, and I left Travis Kelce in one league on a different platform. So it's kind of just. It's very stressful at times for me, and it just is what it is. So it's gonna have to be a building process for myself.
Yeah, I completely understand that. I am also in a similar situation. I did not realize that waivers ran in one league on Wednesdays and Wednesdays alone, but there are no more pickups after that. And I was like, oh, the first game's not Thursday. I can check everything out for that. And I have Mark Andrews and no backup tight end. So I really have to hope that Andrews plays, or my tight end spot is going to be a big old goose egg. So before we get into your matchups to exploit on thegameday.com, what goes into creating content during the season as far as how you balance everything? I know that it's a crazy time of year for all of us. We're all writing, podcasting, doing guest spots like you were so generous to do today. So what all goes into that, and how do you balance it?
Definitely a balancing act, and this is my first year, truly full time in this industry. So it's definitely a learning process. Thankfully, I got a few people that I can lean on at the game day that have been doing this for a little while and have a little bit of helpful experience there. But time management is so key. Making sure you have some time to yourself to kind of take a chill pill, really, to relax. If that's an hour a day, 2 hours a day, go for a walk, go to the gym. Walk the dog, just sit outside. Honestly, there has to be some level of time to yourself that you can kind of just catch a breath and not just stare at the computer screen all day, because it is tough, for us, especially if we're not in an office, somewhere we can kind of be focused for that 8 to 10 hour day. If we're just kind of sitting at home, working like a lot of people in this industry are, that are even full time, you have to take some time management to yourself and really, really focus on making yourself the most efficient level that you can. So I have, a pretty strict schedule for myself of when I'm creating content. I create content about 5 to 6 days a week. And I always have, kind of an hour and a half each day where I kind of just take some time away, go for a walk. One of those days I go to the gym. And then I really just try to make sure I am not spending entirely too much time. And if any of my bosses are watching, you didn't hear this.
I think everybody understands, though, not just in
Absolutely.
the fantasy space, but even in general everyday life.
Yep.
You have to kind of reset yourself just to keep those creative juices and that burnout from happening. And
Oh yeah.
so that's very good advice, not just for the fantasy football creators out there, but also the fantasy managers and everybody else who just enjoys football.
Mhm.
Um, Andrea, thank you so much for joining us. Mr. Scampers says, Sam, very happy to see you here. So let's move on to the matchups to exploit article on thegameday.com.
Mhm.
I love exploiting matchups. I think figuring out strengths and weaknesses of teams are so interesting, but I want to know what your process is in deciding the matchups in week one, because obviously we can see who they brought in, how they performed last year, etc. But with coaching changes and the relative unknowns we have with week one, what helps you narrow it down to the best matchups?
So yeah, so this piece, the inspiration from this piece comes from Mike Clay's Shadow Report matchup on ESPN.com. It's an industry standard article. It's been around for years at this point, and I'm a huge fan of Mike Clay. His analytical look at this game has kind of set the standard for a lot of the modern day analytics that we have in our industry now. And I decided about a year ago I kind of wanted to create this kind of content and really kind of flesh it out a little bit more, since he focuses on the wide receivers and cornerbacks spot of it. And I wanted to go a little bit deeper, obviously still, include the wide receivers and cornerbacks, but also including running backs versus defensive line matchups, and then quarterbacks versus general secondary matchups as well, since all three can kind of go into, how we view our fantasy teams, how we view our betting lines. So for me, I use Clay's accompanying sheet. He includes all of the matchups, wide receiver versus cornerback matchups as well. And then I go, into, all the analytical tools we have. Pro Football Focus is a huge help for me in learning, what guys line up where, what their projected matchups are. And then just knowing what defenses are good and bad against what kind of skill sets of teams. Like, for instance, knowing that the Houston Texans are one of the worst run defenses in the league. They were the worst run defense last year. And even though they minorly upgraded by bringing in a guy like Sheldon Rankins and, drafting Will Anderson in the draft this year, I really don't think that necessarily impacts how their rush defense overall is going to look. And thus, J.K. Dobbins is one of my favorite rushing matchups to attack this week in week one. And I have Dobbins as an RB1. So, it's just small things, knowing like that, using some of the tools that are available to us, and then kind of diving in at some of the analytical, matchups work that some of the, the true greats in this industry have laid out for us. And it just all kind of comes together, and it's come into an article that I think is going to start a little bit smaller. I've started with 2 matchups per position per week, but I'd like to expand it to 3 to 5 by the end of the season as we get a little bit more detail there.
More information is always good, especially when doing these matchups. It's not good when you get news like Mr. Scampers just put into the chat that Darren Waller is officially listed as questionable with a hamstring injury. What is going on with all these top tight ends? I cannot handle this. We had Kelsey out last night. We don't know if Andrews is going to play. George Kittle may not play. Now Waller's questionable. What is happening? I do not like this. I may like it personally for the Cowboys, but not for all of my fantasy Waller shares that I have.
Yeah, it's tough because you always have to assume that Waller's gonna, have some sort of issue. A lot of these guys just play hurt, though. I do think that's something that goes under the radar. That's why I really am not too concerned about Mark Andrews. I was never too concerned about, a guy like Terry McLaurin playing through his turf toe injury. Truly, I'm not that concerned with Waller as well, unless it happened today. If this is something the team's just been monitoring throughout the week and they chose to disclose it on Friday, as part of their required, disclosing process, then that's fine to me. If this is something that just popped up today, like how Christian Watson just suffered a hamstring injury yesterday, then that's probably something that we have to keep an eye on, because that means the Giants are going to have to use one of their 16 slot receivers in this game, and nobody wants that. So
it's like a slot receiver elephant graveyard, is it not? I mean, they're all slot receivers, and nobody else really profiles as like that big X guy. So it's going to be interesting, speaking about matchups, who does what and who matches up with who, especially Trayvon Diggs and Stephon Gilmore. So moving on. And again, guys, get your questions in the chat, because we do have our start sit at the end of this segment. So go ahead and get them in there so we can get those answered for you. But there are so many wonderful DFS matchups to exploit this week. And I talked a bit about it a little bit on the Alarm Fantasy Football Show, but the Colts are in serious trouble with Calvin Ridley, are they not?
Yeah, absolutely. And if we went over to Mike Clay's matchups extraordinaire piece, Jacksonville has 3 really solid matchups. First of all, there's 2 rookies in this secondary, Julius Brents and Darnell Baker. And then you have Kenny Moore, who's going to be manning the nickel against Christian Kirk most of the time. And that's not a terrible matchup. That'll probably be even-sided on both sides, because Moore is a good player, naturally. He's coming off a little bit of a down season, a little bit injury-filled last year. He's going to look to rebound on that. But you get Calvin Ridley going up against a second-round rookie who's had to really take on a bigger role since Isaiah Rodgers was indefinitely suspended for gambling earlier in the summer. That's an issue. This is not going to be a shadow matchup, so this is not going to be Brent's on Ridley by himself. He's going to have he's playing the strong side cornerback role in Jacksonville's scheme, which means he's going to have some safety help over the top. But I'm not sure anybody can guard Calvin Ridley in this Indianapolis Colts secondary. And I'm really worried it's going to be open season for the Jaguars with him this week.
Well, I hope so, because I got Ridley everywhere that I could. And when we talk about the underdog coming up, I'm probably going to have a prop in about him as well. So I love to hear that. Mike Evans also has a good matchup against I'm just going to say putrid Vikings secondary. But does Baker Mayfield worry you when it comes to passing downfield, or do you think that he's going to get that confidence and just make this matchup work?
Yeah, this is an interesting question for me, because I looked at this, and the splits for Baker Mayfield are kind of jarring. When he started with the Browns in 18 and 19, he was one of the best adjusted deep ball completion percentage passers in the NFL. Like, he was consistently ranking inside the top 10 in 2018 and 2019. And then from 2020 on, he's kind of just bottomed out in that category. I don't know if it's the personnel he's worked with, the last couple of years in Cleveland and then in, the Rams last year, or if it's a confidence issue for him. But whatever it was, something changed there. I do think having Mike Evans there for however long that Evans is there, assuming, he's still on the trading block with his contract issues, I think it'll be good for Baker. I think he gives him a confident target downfield that I don't think Baker's had since Amari Cooper, since he had Amari Cooper on the Browns there. But I do think that Baker is going to find something. I think, we're going to have one way or the other here. We're going to find out really quickly, because the Vikings have a really, really, really bad secondary. Both Caleb Evans and Andrew Booth Jr. were 2 pretty bad rookies last year. They're going to be manning the outside for Evans, who runs most of his routes outside. And they gave up the most fantasy points per route snap last year. So I do look for Evans to have a good game this week. And I do think Baker's going to have to find something downfield. And I think we're going to find out really quickly.
Yeah, I think that's one of those situations where we're going to know, I think, before even the first half is over, whether or not this offense is going to operate one way or this other. And with Andrew Booth, Yeah, his talent is there, but he's been injured so much that I just don't know if he's ever going to be up to caliber in the NFL. So that's something and an interesting thing to monitor as well. So
Mhm.
we talked a little bit about the running backs against the Texans, and we always play running backs against the Texans. So Dobbins should be a lock. But with Odell Beckham and Mark Andrews on the injury report, I mean, that goes even sky high, right? Like people shouldn't be considering him as an RB2. They should be talking, I think, top tier what RB1 range, don't you think?
Yeah, I absolutely do. He's my RB11 this week. I think that, look, what we saw at the end of last season and what we're going to see this week are going to be two different J.K. Dobbins. Last year, he was about 8 months removed from the ACL injury and reconstruction, and he was cutting well. It didn't look exactly like he had regained all his top speed. He was getting tracked down by linebackers. And, despite the fact he was still finding holes and they were still trusting him with the ball, they didn't want to overload him with snaps. That's why we saw him have, 38%, 44%, those kind of snap shares. I do think that this is going to be Dobbins' backfield. I think that he's really going to be helped by this new passing scheme of Todd Monken's, because I think it's going to open up the running lanes a little bit more for the Ravens. In past years, everyone knew that the Ravens wanted to run the football and run it all the time if possible. They obviously still had to account for Lamar Jackson running the football, but between him and Dobbins, they knew for the most part that they were going to run, about 55 to 60% of times. Now we're not so sure. Monken was one of the most pass-heavy coordinators in the NFL when he had Jameis Winston, in 2015. And I think Lamar is going to be a really good signal caller for this Todd Monken offense. But I do think it's going to open up a lot of running lanes for J.K. Dobbins immediately. And again, he gets a really good matchup right away to figure it out.
Very excited to see him back in action. I unfortunately don't have a lot of him because I got burned by him last year and I just
Mhm.
couldn't dip my toe back in the Dobbins water. But for a DFS slate this week, I think I'm going to have to give him a closer look. So we're getting close to the end of this segment. Guys, get your questions in. And then the next segment, we're going to get to the start sits for this week. But Justin Herbert is going up against the Dolphins. And that to me is just so delicious, especially with Jalen Ramsey missing. What do you expect from him this game?
Oh, I mean, I love this matchup. Like it's just truly great. I believe it was the second highest game total on the slate after the Chiefs and Lions. Obviously, that didn't work out in our favor, but this doesn't have any issues like that. So there's no injury issues. There's no Travis Kelce missing from this matchup. Everyone is there. You have one of the preeminent cornerbacks in the league out in Jalen Ramsey this week. I think both quarterbacks are going to be throwing for the fences each time that their team gets on the field. You have five startable wide receiver, is in Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, Quentin Johnston if he's out there. So I think there's going to be a lot of passing in this game. Not so sure about the rushing. I do want to keep an eye on a guy like Raheem Mostert. The Chargers defense on the ground was not good last year, and I included that again in one of my matchups there. The Chargers ranked dead last in expected points added per carry and yards per carry last year, and they also ranked bottom 6 in PPR points allowed to opposing running backs. I know we don't view Raheem Mostert as a pass catching running back, but he could get some serious work there. With A-Chain still kind of a little iffy with his shoulder injury, Jeff Wilson's on IR for a few weeks, so I will look for that. And then I'll obviously look for the Chargers to be airing the ball out an absolute ton in this game.
And especially with Kellen Moore now there as offensive coordinator, that is something that he loves to do. Very excited about this game. Are there any honorable mentions that didn't make the article that maybe you're looking at, but just couldn't quite fit them in there since they were so narrowed down?
Yeah, one that we didn't talk about that is on the article I want to talk about is Geno Smith versus this Rams defense. Now, my main worry about this game is that the Seahawks are just so overpowering versus this Rams defense that literally is starting like JV leaguers, that it doesn't matter and Geno doesn't get to put up the yards that he should, but he could rip this secondary apart. If I have any of the Seattle starting receivers, I'm starting them in this game. That includes Jackson Smith-Njigba, who's coming off his wrist injury, but Pete Carroll says he'll play. Whether we trust Pete Carroll is another issue. But I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt for at least 1 week this year with injury talk. But I do think that Geno Smith is going to absolutely rip this defense apart. Now that Jalen Ramsey is gone, it's even better. But in 2022, both DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett pulverized the secondary. They had 8 explosive pass plays of 15-plus yards and 4 touchdowns between the duo. And that was with Jalen Ramsey in those games. So without him, I think they're going to tee off.
Yeah, I think that trusting Pete Carroll is like trusting that ex-boyfriend that keeps calling you or texting you at 2 a.m. like you up. Like you want to trust them and you want to believe what they say, but it just never pans out. But Tyler Lockett, I think, is one of the most underrated receivers for fantasy, has been year after year after year, and he's so good and gets such a prime matchup against the Rams, who are just, let's just say it, they're garbage. So let's get to some start sits before we get you out of here. And again, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate you. So Mo Diesel early on asked, start 1, half PPR, Juju, Warren, A-Chain, or Flex Andrews, and start a waiver wire tight end, Dulcich or Ferguson.
Let's see. Thinking about this, I actually like the idea of flexing Andrews and starting one of the waiver wire tight ends. And the tight end that I would go to is Jake Ferguson. And I know there are some people who have, recently said that they're not too high on Ferguson. They're kind of giving him the same jag talk that they gave Dalton Schultz. And I don't really hate it. I know the Peyton Hendershot, he ran just as much routes and had just as many snaps as Ferguson last year. But I do think we've had a steady drumbeat of good news on Ferguson all summer coming out of Cowboys camp. I'm not a huge believer in doing anything, at least not right away. He's coming off an injury, so he had to deal with that. And the Giants were a bottom 10 team versus tight ends in 2022, allowed 55 yards per game, allowed almost 7 targets per game, and ranked 25th in fantasy points allowed in the red zone to tight end. So we could see Ferguson, used as kind of that red zone target right away. And I think that'll be really good against the Giants defense that was strong in the red zone, more of a bend don't break off or defense. But I think that's due for regression this year. And obviously it's Andrews. If Andrews plays, I'm most likely going to start him. I want to see what this new passing offense can do.
Yep, I agree with you. I think if Andrews plays, you start him in the flex, but I'm going to disagree with you on the tight end to start because I absolutely love Greg Dulcich. I know that we only saw a little bit out of him last season, but what we did see from him was wonderful. He was top 10 in basically all the metrics you want to see, like deep targets, yards after catch, things like that. And the Raiders defense is very bad, and they're likely going to be without Chandler Jones to make them even worse. And I don't think that Jerry Jeudy plays. And if he does play, he'll likely be a decoy. So I can see Dulcich getting more in this matchup. If Andrews doesn't start, then I would go Dulcich and then probably A-Chain as a pass-catching running back against the Chargers.
Yep.
So we hope that answered your question, even if we differed a little bit on our tight ends. Andrea asks, need 1 flex, Rachaad White, Zach Charbonnet, Jordan Addison, or Zay Flowers in a half PPR?
I'm going to lean Rachaad White here unless Kenneth Walker does not play. If Kenneth Walker doesn't play, I'm going to start Zach Charbonnet all day. Again, we want to target that Rams defense any which way that we can. And especially, all the drumbeat has steered towards Charbonnet, having a good offseason so far. A lot of people have said, this could start out being, a 55-45 split right away. And then Charbonnet could end up being the more talented player between him and Kenneth Walker. Remember, they both have 2nd round draft capital, and Charbonnet, came out of UCLA, and, made some really nice plays to get noticed there. Otherwise, I'm going to take Rachaad White. He's looked really good. There's been a lot of notes that he could be used as sort of a 3-down back initially while Sean Tucker gets up to speed for the Buccaneers. And then again, I want to target bad defenses, and that Vikings pass defense as bad as it gets. So it can be really bad. And then I don't know. I really love Jordan Addison as well, but we're gonna go with some caution here from kind of what we noticed with Jahmyr Gibbs. Guys just might start with a little bit smaller of a snap share in week one than a season long outlook as them. So I like Addison as much more of a season long play. Same with Zay Flowers.
Yep, I'm with you. I think if Walker doesn't play, then we go Charbonnet, Rashad White. Going back to that question about Baker Mayfield, is he going to be that huck it, chuck it guy, or is he going to be safe with those low A dot throws? And if he is safe with those low A dot throws, Rashad White is one of the best pass catching running backs in the entire game.
Yep.
So I would go with him if Walker plays, and completely agree with you on what you said about Addison Flowers. So we're good there. Andrea also asks, need one flex, Chris Olave, Devontae Smith, James Conner, or Miles Sanders in full PPR?
This is easy. Chris Olave. Normally, I would say Devontae Smith if, this wasn't the Patriots. The thing with the Patriots is they play the fourth most man-heavy coverage in the NFL. And Devontae Smith was not the man beater last year. He was good at beating man, but he was much better at beating zone coverage. The man beater in Philadelphia offense is A.J. Brown. The guy gets targeted at like a 38% clip against man coverage and was really, really successful at beating it nearly every single week. The most notable one in my mind stands out when he torched Pittsburgh's defense for 3 touchdowns. That was on a lot of man coverage there. So I think Devontae Smith has a good week. I don't think he has a great week. But I do think Chris Olave has a truly great week against one of the weakest secondaries in the NFL in Tennessee there. And I do think that their shiny new toy, Derek Carr, I think they want to show him off. You obviously have no Alvin Kamara there. The Titans' run defense can be pretty strong. They got Jeffrey Simmons there. He's one of the best run defenders in the NFL. So, while I like Jamal Williams this week, I don't think he gets used that heavily. And I think the Titans could sneakily be in this game. I actually think they win this game outright. And that style of play bodes really well for some Chris Olave garbage time passing down work.
Yep, I love that call. Absolutely. And the Titans secondary is not great, Bob. Not great.
Not great.
All right, Mr. Scampers, we've got a couple more in here, and then I will get you out of here. How time flies when you're having fun.
Absolutely.
Half PPR, need to Christian Kirk at Indy, Samaje versus Las Vegas, Dylan at Chicago, Deion Jackson versus the Jags, or Gabe Davis at the New York Jets.
Okay, I think we have the wrong one up on the screen, but I see it in the chat.
Yes.
I love Christian Kirk. We talked about his matchup versus Kenny Moore a little bit earlier as one of my matchups that I was looking to exploit a little bit. I'm really high on Christian Kirk. I'm a lot higher than everyone else is. He's my wide receiver 19 in season-long leagues, and I have him boosted up to wide receiver 17 this week. So he's going to be my first guy to go. My second guy to go, this is going to be really tough. I'll go with some garbage time work and take Deion Jackson simply because it feels like he's going to be the passing down back if Zach Moss is active and the 3 down back if Zach Moss is not active. And I think he could see some intriguing garbage time work there in a game that I don't think the Colts will be competitive in, but, we might see him catch a few dump off passes there. I'm not a huge A.J. Dillon guy. I've just been burned way too many times on him lately, and I think the Bears are going to be a little bit more competitive in that game than people think. And then I just don't know what to think about this Jets defense. They could be really, really good, and Gabe Davis just gave me too many issues last year on a week-to-week basis to be, really, really confident in starting him against a solid secondary. And I'm all in on Javonte Williams this year. I think Samaje Perine is relegated to a 3rd down role, if at best. And that really doesn't do much for me. So I'll go with Deion Jackson. Very shaky pick there. But Christian Kirk is the true winner there.
Yeah, I think I would go with Christian Kirk as well, but I would also go Dylan at Chicago because Christian Watson did just get ruled out. So I think that we see a very run-heavy approach just because there are no options. I know everyone's like, Jaden Reed. Again,
Hey,
he's a rookie.
Don't don't slander Jaden
Well,
Reed.
I'm not it's not
I
slander
know.
so much as it's just inexperience and
Yeah.
things like that. There are gonna be rookie mistakes that happen, and so I think that LaFleur plays it a little bit
Yep.
more conservative with the ground game, and so that's why I'm going Dylan, but your
Fair.
reasoning also very sound. A couple more here. Half PPR, Jahan versus Arizona, Javonte versus Las Vegas, or Pittman versus the Jags?
Yeah, this is going to be a pretty easy one for me. We're gonna roll against the Raiders defense here. That was, if I have it up, eighth worst against running backs in terms of yards allowed, and then 28th in 28th worst in terms of fantasy points allowed to running backs last year. Give me a fully healthy Javonte Williams going against them, and he's got something to prove. They've been talking trash on him not being ready all season. He's been fighting the odds. I think he comes out with something to prove right away.
And possibly, likely, no Chandler Jones as well,
Yeah.
making them even worse.
Mhm.
Finally, from Jared Moore, Noah Fant or David Njoku, PPR.
Njoku for me. Bengals were the second worst team in the NFL versus tight ends last year, and again, this is a connection that was touched on last year. Deshaun Watson really likes throwing to tight ends. Um, Especially in the red zone. And Njoku had the second most targets, red zone targets for among tight ends last year. And I expect him to continue that this year.
I love it. All great questions, all wonderful answers. Thank you, Sam, so much for joining us. Let everybody know where they can follow you and where they can find your work.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone can follow me on Twitter at Swagman95. All my work is found at the Game Day. We have a ton of fantasy football and betting content coming out on the Absolute Daily. Some great pieces. Michelle Majouk's start sit column, my matchups to exploit column, Frank Amarante's rankings, Scott Engel's waivers and sleepers and busts and player props. We have an absolute ton of content that comes out every single day, every single week.
I can't wait to see it as the
Yep.
season goes on. Thank you so much and good luck this weekend. Week 1, we made it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Britt.
See you later.
Yep.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for all those great questions. Those are wonderful. Again, if you have any more that aren't in the chat or I don't get to, you can ask me on Twitter at Britt_Flinn or ask them in the chat, and I will go back once this chat is loaded and reply there. It may not be immediately, but I will get to them before Sunday morning. Don't you worry. All right. So we've only got a few more minutes before we've got to get out of here today. So let's talk some more underdog fantasy because, as you know, Brit's Fantasy Blitz is sponsored by Underdog Fantasy. And now, along with their traditional pick'ems, there's a brand new way to play Underdog Fantasy with their in game pick'em contest. The start of the game isn't the end of making your picks because now you can make picks during the game. All you need to do is to sign up at fantasyalarm.com/underdog, use promo code ALARM, and first time depositors get a 100% deposit match up to $100 plus a mystery pick'em special. If you don't know what a mystery pick'em special is, for example, last night it was Patrick Mahomes 0.5 yards. So all he had to do was get 1 yard. And if you hit higher, then you hit. So sign up today, figure out your mystery prop. And I actually took down the 5 game or 5 pick in game entry last night, which multiplies your entry 20 times. I had Isaiah Pacheco higher than 5.5 receiving yards, Jared Goff lower than 284 passing yards, Aiden Hutchinson higher than 3.5 tackles and assists, Sam Laporta higher than 34.5 receiving yards, and David Montgomery higher than 56.5 rushing yards. So that was a very fun way to continue playing the game as it went on. You've got halftime, open up your phone. You've got some time to kill. But of course, you want to make your picks before the game too. So let's talk about a few that are available for week 1 since it is finally here. So, some week 1 stats that I really like. Elijah Moore versus the Cincinnati Bengals, stats set at 2.5 receptions. For that, I'm going to go higher. I don't understand how people are still sleeping on Elijah Moore. We've heard nothing but great things about him through training camp, about his relationship with Deshaun Watson. He's the wide receiver 2 on this offense, and the Bengals lost both of their starting safeties. So I think that 2.5 receptions is absolutely going to be higher. I'm making that my first pick. Next, I have Rashad White versus the Vikings. His stats are set at 19.5 receiving yards. And again, with that one, I'm going to go higher. We talked a little bit about it with Sam. The Vikings defense is very, very bad. Baker Mayfield will likely be throwing those short A-dot routes. Rashad White is one of the best receiving backs in the entire game. I think he definitely um, gets over or higher than 19.5 receiving yards. That one's an easy one for me. Next one is going to be Treylon Burks versus the Saints. His stat is set at 36.5 receiving yards, and I'm absolutely going higher on this one. It was announced today that Marshawn Lattimore is going to play. So, as he will likely be covering DeAndre Hopkins, I think that Paulson Adebo is going to be on Treylon Burks. I don't know if you guys know just how bad Paulson Adebo is in coverage. He's allowed a 130.3 passer rating, 0.39 points per cover snap, 2.21 fantasy points per target, and 11.9 fantasy points per game. If he is covering Burks, I think Burks has a complete breakout game, and I'm absolutely going higher than 36.5 yards. Next, I have Bryce Young versus the Falcons. Stats set at 17.5 completions. I'm going to go lower on this one. With DJ Chark already ruled out, Adam Thielen and Terrace Marshall questionable, and then the state of their offensive line, I'm just not sure how efficient that offense is going to be. I don't think that Laviska Shenault can catch the ball. Jonathan Mingo, I know that he was drafted with some high draft capital, but he is a rookie and is going to make some rookie mistakes. So I don't think that they managed to complete over 17.5. So again, I'm going lower there. Next, I have Jamal Williams versus the Titans. Stat set at 14.5 rushing attempts. I'm going to go higher here. Again, we talked with Sam about this. There's no Alvin Kamara. Kendre Miller's banged up. Jamal Williams is basically all that they have. And although the Titans' defense has been pretty good against the run, this backfield belongs to Jamal Williams. So I think there's absolutely no way that he goes lower. So again, I'm selecting higher for that. Next, I'm going Raheem Mostert versus the Chargers. Stats set at 12.5 rushing attempts. I'm just going to keep the train rolling and go higher on this one as well. The Chargers are one of the worst defenses in the league against the run. I think their secondary is pretty good. And in order to preserve Tua, because he has an injury history that we don't want to be repeated, I think that Mostert gets quite a few carries. Jeff Wilson is on IR. A-Chain is still banged up. So I think that number is higher. Next, I'm going to go stick with this same game, go Tyreek Hill versus the Chargers with a stat of 0.5 rushing or receiving touchdowns. I think this game's going to be a shootout. Tyreek Hill is definitely going to score. I think this is a smash play all the way at higher. Next, I'm going to go Aaron Jones versus the Bears, set at 0.5 rushing plus receiving touchdowns. Again, I'm going to go higher. With Christian Watson out, with Romeo Doubs questionable, there aren't that many options on Green Bay's offense in the passing game. I think that this game is heavily funneled through the ground game. I think that both Jones and Dillon have a very big workload, but I think with Jones being the experienced veteran, that he's the one who's going to see the goal line work, and he's going to go higher here. I'm also going Van Jefferson versus the Seahawks, stat set at 3 receptions, and I'm going to go higher on that one. With Cooper Kupp out, Jefferson is the wide receiver 1 in this offense. The defense is awful with the Rams. They're going to be playing from behind with Jefferson as that number 1 target. I think there's no way that he doesn't go higher than 3 receptions. Next, and we're going to have to watch this one because with the news that Waller did appear on the injury report, it's a little iffy, but I'm still going to go ahead and let you know since it was in the notes. Darren Waller versus the Cowboys stat is set at 4.5 receptions. I'm going to go higher. Daniel Jones has eyes for no one but Darren Waller. Darren Waller is going to be a target monster if he plays. And even if he's limited, I still think that he goes higher than 4.5 receptions. So that wraps up our underdog picks of the day, gives you a couple options to look at as you're going into your Sunday mornings. Again, to sign up, go to fantasyalarm.com/underdog, use the promo code ALARM, and first time users get a 100% deposit match up to $100. Along with these pick'em contests, they are also running weekly contests and battle royales. There's honestly something for everyone at Underdog Fantasy. So get on over there and go check it out. So that's it. We are close to the end of the show. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Mr. Scampers. Thank you, everybody else, for their questions and for joining us in the chat. Be sure to go over to fantasyalarm.com, get yourself set up with that All Pro package at fantasyalarm.com/All Pro with that 7-day trial. And don't forget to download the Bettercast app. It's interactive, it's fun. There's so many awesome ways to stay involved in the game with the Bettercast app. So to download and sign up, it's free. Go to the Apple App Store or Google Play stores, download the Bettercast app, and get started on that on Sunday as we go through our first full Sunday slate of the year. So stay tuned here on the Fantasy Alarm and Better Sports Network YouTube channels. From 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern, we have the Fantasy Football Game Show from Front Yard Fantasy. From 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern, we have Better Sports Betting with Dan Servadidio and Howard Bender. And from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern, the MLB DFS live stream with James Grande and John Mpemba. Also, don't forget to join us on Sunday as it is kickoff. John Mpemba and I will be on the Fantasy Alarm and Better Sports channel at 9 a.m., followed by Howard Bender and Andrew Cooper at 10 a.m., and John Mpemba and Andrew Cooper at 11 a.m. So join us Monday with special guest Corey Parson. Y'all have a great weekend, and thanks for getting blitzed with me.